Let me ask you about, you mentioned the Israel lobby. You wrote a book, probably your most controversial book on the topic.
Not probably. Clearly the most controversial book I ever wrote.
So you've criticized the Israel lobby in the United States for influencing U.S. policy in the Middle East. Can you explain what the Israel lobby is, their influence, and your criticism over the past, let's say, a couple decades?
Well, the argument that Steve Walt and I made, actually we wrote an article first, and which appeared in the London Review of Books, and then we wrote the book itself. Our argument is that the lobby is a loose coalition of individuals and organizations that push American policy in a pro-Israel direction. Basically the lobby is interested in getting the United States, and here we're talking mainly about the American government, to support Israel no matter what Israel does. And our argument is that if you look at the relationship between the United States and Israel, it's unprecedented in modern history. This is the closest relationship that you can find between any two countries in recorded history. It's truly amazing the extent to which Israel and the United States are joined at the hip. And we support Israel no matter what, almost all the time. Our argument is that that is largely due to the influence of the lobby. The lobby is an extremely powerful interest group. Now, it's very important to understand that the American political system is set up in ways that allow interest groups of all sorts to wield great influence. So in the United States, you have an interest group or a lobby like the National Rifle Association that makes it well nigh impossible to get gun control, right? And so with the Israel lobby, you have this group of individuals and organizations that wield enormous influence on U.S. policy toward the Middle East. And this is not surprising given the nature of the American political system. So our argument is that the lobby is not doing anything that's illegal or illicit or immoral or unethical. It's just a good old-fashioned American interest group. And it just happens to be extremely powerful. And our argument is that this is not good for the United States because no two countries have the same interests all the time. And when our interests conflict with Israel's interests, we should be able to do what we think is in our national interest, in America's national interest. But the lobby tends to conflate America's national interests with Israel's national interests and wants the United States to support Israel no matter what. We also argue, and I cannot emphasize this enough given what's going on in the world today, that the lobby's effects, the lobby has not been pushing policies that are in Israel's interest. So our argument is that the lobby pushes policies that are not in America's interest or not in Israel's interest. Now you're saying to yourself, what exactly does he mean by that? What every president since Jimmy Carter has tried to do, as I said before, is to foster a two-state solution, to push Israel, which is the dominant player in Greater Israel, push Israel to accept the two-state solution. And we have run into huge resistance from the lobby whenever we tried to, let's be blunt about it, coerce Israel, right? In a perfect world where there was no lobby and an American president was free to put pressure on Israel, to coerce Israel, I believe we would have gone a long way towards getting two-state solution. And I believe this would have been in Israel's interests. But we couldn't get a two-state solution because it was almost impossible to put meaningful pressure on Israel because of the lobby. So this was not in Israel's interest, and it was not in America's interest. And that was the argument that we made. And we, of course, got huge pushback for making that argument.
What's the underlying motivation of the lobby? Is it religious in nature? Is it similar to the way war hawks are sort of militaristic in nature? Is it nationalistic in nature? What's if you were to describe this loose coalition of people, what would you say is their motivation?
Well, first of all, I think you have to distinguish between Jews and Christians. You want to remember that there are a huge number of Christian Zionists who are deeply committed to Israel no matter what, right? And then there are a large number of Jews. The Jews are obviously the most important of those two groups in the Israel lobby. But, one of the arguments that we made in the book is that you should not call it the Jewish lobby, because it's not populated just by Jews, and Christian Zionists are an important part of that lobby. But furthermore, there are a good number of Jews who are opposed to the lobby and the policies that the lobby purveys. And there are a number of Jews who are prominent anti-Zionists, right? So, and they're obviously not in the lobby. Or if you take a group like Jewish Voice for Peace, right? Jewish Voice for Peace is not in the lobby. So it's wrong to call it a Jewish lobby. But with regard to the American Jews who are in that lobby, I think that really this is all about nationalism. It's not so much religion. Many of those Jews who are influential in the lobby are not religious in any meaningful sense of that term, but they self-identify as Jewish in the sense that they feel they're part of a Jewish nation. And that in addition to being an American, right, they are part of this tribe, this nation called Jews, and that they have a responsibility to push the United States in ways that support the Jewish state. So I think that's what drives most, if not almost all, the Jews. This is not to say there's not a religious dimension for some of them, but I think that the main connection is much more tribal in nature.
So I had a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu, and he said fundamentally, if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Semitic. So the Zionist project is tied at the hip to the Jewish project. What do you have to say to that?
Look, you can define anti-Semitism any way you want, right? And you can define anti-Semitism to incorporate anti-Zionism. And I think we have reached the point where anti-Semitism is identified today, not just with anti-Zionism, but with criticism of Israel. If you criticize Israel, some people will say, you're an anti-Semite. And if that's your definition of anti-Semitism, it's taken an important term and stretched it to the point where it's meaningless, right? So when Steve and I wrote the book, wrote the article and then wrote the book, all sorts of people said that we were anti-Semites. This is a ludicrous charge, but what they meant was you're criticizing the lobby, you're criticizing Israel, and therefore you're an anti-Semite. Okay, if that's what an anti-Semite is, somebody who criticizes Israel, probably half the Jewish community, if not more in the United States, is anti-Semitic. And of course, you get into all these crazy games where people are calling Jews self-hating Jews and anti-Semites because they're critical of Israel. But even people who are anti-Zionist, I don't think they're anti-Semitic at all. You can argue they're misguided. That's fine. But many of these people are Jewish and proud of the fact that they're Jewish. They just don't believe that nationalism and Jewish nationalism is a force that should be applauded. And you want to understand that in the American context, there is a rich tradition of anti-Zionism, right? And these were not people who were anti-Semites, if you go back to the 30s, 40s, 50s. And the same thing was even true in Europe. There were all sorts of European Jews who were opposed to Zionism. Were they anti-Semites? I don't think so. But we've gotten to the point now where people are so interested in stopping any criticism of Israel that they wield this weapon of calling people anti-Semites so loosely that the term has kind of lost meaning. So I think Netanyahu is wrong-headed to equate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism.